Institute offices are right here. The Institute offers year-round educational public programming for students and the community, a mixture of students and community as we have it here tonight. It's wonderful to see so many of you to show up for tonight's talk. I want to say just a few words how the events came into being that we have here, make a few other announcements, and eventually introduce our speaker who came from Portland to be with us tonight.
Jörn, kannst du ein klein bisschen zurückgehen, sonst schneide ich dir den Kopf ab.
I can. Okay. As you can see, we have this exhibit display around here, and we hope that you spend a few more minutes after our talk to spend some time with these panels, or come back at a later time, spend more time. It really shows Jewish life in Germany today by looking at individual people, and they tell you in their own words of why they chose to either return to Germany, to continue living in Germany, or to just decide to go back and forth to different countries. You see some stories, it's like, half of the time I spent in New York and half the time I spent in Berlin. And they, of course, all reflect on the fact that as Jewish people, it might sound a little ironic to live in the land of the former perpetrators, those who had tried to kill you in 1940s. And so the exhibit kind of tries to tell you why are there about 50,000 Jews living in Germany today. And the number is increasing, not decreasing. And there are more and more Jewish people who come to Germany as the country of their choice. Some come from Israel, some from America, some from Poland, some from Russia, and so on and so forth. So take some time, look at them. There are also kind of certain personalities that the exhibit organizers chose. I mean, people who have a voice in the cultural life of Germany. And you can see like some are rabbis and some are journalists, some are fashion designers, and so on and so forth. So do so. This exhibit was not designed by the Martin Springer Institute. Actually, the Martin Springer Institute, together with the Department of Global Languages and Cultures, applied for a grant from the Federal Republic of Germany that is given out to the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. And they gave certain choices about what they would like to sponsor, and that was one of the possibilities to put up this exhibit and accompanied with talks. And we chose two talks. The one of tonight with Miriam Widman on between Angst and Acceptance, Jewish life in Germany today. And next Wednesday in Liberal Arts 120, I believe, or 136, I forget, but in Liberal Arts building, Jacobia Dahm, who talks about Syrian refugee crisis in Germany. And she basically traces as a photographer and photojournalist refugees on the trail from Syria to Berlin. And she will show her photos and talk about what this means for refugees to do this trail and end up in Germany. That is next Wednesday. Two aspects of contemporary Germany. And again, the exhibit is up till October 26, so plenty of time to come back, bring your friends, and let other people know that's up here. So that is this particular event. Why October 3rd? Partially it's because of the logistics, but October 3rd is also a symbolic date. October 3rd, 1990, Germany declared this to be the official date of unification of the eastern part of Germany, which was under Russian communist rule, Soviet communist rule, and the western part of Germany. That, of course, was preceded by November 9, 1989, when the wall in Berlin came down, and the separation between these two German states, highly armed and ready to fight a war against each other, when suddenly the wall opened up and the fence came down and the German people decided to unite as the country as it is today. Because November 9 is such a fraught, complicated date in German history, the German government decided we cannot use November 9 as the official day of celebration for the unification of Germany, even though that would have been more appropriate on some level, because that's when the wall came down, when suddenly the wall in Berlin opened and people just went across the border and nothing happened. But November 9 is also November 9, 1938. That is called the Reichskristallnacht, or Crystal Night, or Night of Broken Glass, when for the first time there was a widespread violence, physical violence, assault on the Jewish community in Germany by the Nazis. Most synagogues in Germany were burned down on this day. Shops were destroyed, people were killed, and thousands of people, Jewish men particularly, deported to other places. So you can't really celebrate the unification of Germany on the night when just accidentally by history you had the beginning of the Holocaust, as many people would put it, for this particular night. And November 9, 1923, Hitler for the first time tried to do a coup d'etat, a putsch, a military takeover in the city of Munich. That was kind of the beginning of the Nazi dictatorship. So November 9 is a complicated day for Germans. Okay? But you don't want to go out in the street and fire fireworks and celebrate unification when it's also connected to the Holocaust. It just so happens that today is also Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And so in many ways, and some left would say like that shouldn't really happen today. You couldn't quite avoid this particular date, but it's kind of symbolic on many different levels. If you think about a new year as a renewal of thoughts, and think about the exhibit as a renewal of Jewish life in Germany, then maybe there is a justification that it's actually happening tonight. These are my comments. We have more material for you to take with you about the kind of work we have done last year and the kind of work we plan to do next year. Again, I want to point out the program with Israel that we're planning to do next summer, a 3-week program. Don't want to introduce it again right now, did it earlier today, but take a flyer, take a look at it, and hopefully you apply. We can only take 10 NAU students, so it's kind of limited of how many people we can accommodate for this program. And at this point, I also want to thank Miriam, who really helped setting and organizing this whole event. I'm starting in July, I believe. And both of us suddenly heard that there's a possibility to apply for a grant, and then we frantically put this together. And it worked. And that's why you're here. Miriam Widman has lived, she's a New Yorker by birth. She now lives in Portland. She has lived many, many years in Germany. At some point 9 years in a row. Now she travels back and forth between Germany and America. She was and is a radio journalist, was also a financial news reporter. I got this right. That was actually the first reason why she was supposed to go to Germany, and without perhaps, hopefully I don't take anything away. When she first had the assignment, she felt like, why would I want to go to Germany as a financial news reporter, as a person who comes from New York and is Jewish, and why would I go to Germany? And then she said, I go, and told her company, only if you have my return flight ready for me. And then it took her 9 years to return finally to America. There's something about angst and acceptance perhaps in her life story that becomes also the framework through which she will tell something about Jewish life today, tonight. She is now a criminal investigator. I hope I got this one right.
Defense. I only work for defense.
Defense. And she says that her journalistic skills are really kind of helped her to think about the criminal investigation skills, because you always have to go out and find people and investigate and ask and talk. And so a very interesting person. Also a radio host at some point, and working for the Jewish Telegraphic...
JTA, Jewish Telegraphic Agency.
For the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, reporting back about Germany when she was living in Germany to other audiences. So please help me welcome her. Miriam.
Thank you so much. First, I want to say that as a journalist, I'm usually on the other side of the podium, so I don't do a lot of this type of speaking. And then if you have any questions, don't save them, just interrupt me, because it'll just help a little bit to have the question at the time when I'm talking. I think part of the introduction, and thank you very much for the great introduction, is that I'm originally from New York, and that colored a lot of my experience in Germany, because, are there any New Yorkers here, first of all? None? Okay. If you know anything about the New York Jewish community, there are a lot of Jews who live in New York. When I was growing up, my high school was a third Jewish, a third Italian, and a third African American. So everybody knew about everybody's, religion and preferences and way of life and families and what they did outside of school. And my public high school, also my public elementary school, all the public schools were closed on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and they're closed on Yom Kippur, and I think that's still true today. So it's, I think, one of the few places in the United States where that happens. Of course, that never happens in Germany, and it doesn't happen in Arizona or really many other places in the US. So my whole experience in Germany is colored by my growing up, where Jews were very accepted. They weren't a majority, but they were certainly, people knew about what it was like to be Jewish. People knew a little bit about being kosher. They knew about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that is completely the opposite in Germany. And the issue in Germany is, yes, there's anti-Semitism, although I would argue it's much less today than you would find in France. France is has an enormous, it's much more difficult to be Jewish in France these days than it is in Germany. The biggest problem I had in Germany is that often I was the first Jewish person that any German person had ever met. Most Germans have never met anybody Jewish. And the reason is, there aren't very many Jewish people who live in Germany. Germany is a country of something like 82 million people. The community, and I'll explain a little bit, the community is also organized very differently than how we organize Jewish communities here. Officially, the Jewish community, I think, is around 100,000. Now, those are people who pay to be members of the Jewish community. If you want to be liberal about the estimates, there's maybe double that. So maybe at the most, people who are of Jewish heritage but don't pay to be part of the community, maybe 180, 200,000. In a country of 82 million, that's nothing. And most of them are in larger cities. The largest communities are in Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich. There are some smaller communities all over the country, but many of these are from people who came from the former Soviet Union. They're the communities are very elderly. They don't really mix that well. So your chances, if you live in a medium-sized city in Germany, your chances of knowing someone Jewish are slim to none. And even if you live in a larger city, if you don't, happen to know someone who's Jewish, you wouldn't meet anybody who is. And so I've had conversations with people, and I don't think they mean it. It's definitely not a nasty thing. It's just there's a lot of ignorance. Many Germans don't know anything about what it is to be Jewish. I was once asked if I attend the Jewish church, and of course it's not a church, it's a synagogue. But people just didn't know that. I grew up kosher, which is, it's hard to explain to non-Jewish Americans what kosher is if you're not part of a community like New York. A lot of people understand the kosher rules are ridiculous. They're very complicated. They almost make no sense, and they're all written in Leviticus in the Bible. And I was just kosher because my parents were kosher and my community was kosher, and that's what it was. Well, I stopped being kosher years ago, but because I grew up that way, I still don't eat pork. I don't mix meat with milk. And at the moment, I'm vegetarian. I went vegetarian, which is easier to be vegetarian than to be kosher. But my first stance in Germany, I didn't, I followed the basic rules kind of a thing, and it was very, very difficult. It was extremely difficult to explain what the rules of kashrut were, because people had no idea what that was. And it was also rather difficult to eat in Germany at one point, and that's probably, being vegetarian in Germany is a lot easier, because pork is an enormous part of the German diet. And so even if you have like a hamburger, it's not beef. They mix the pork with the beef automatically. So any ground substance that you get in most restaurants is mixed. So if you have, if you're eating just anything with a ground thing, they mix it. So it's, and of course pork is just a big deal, as it is in many, many parts of Europe. I mean, Americans eat pork, but not so much as they do in Europe. And I think the further east you go, the more they eat it, kind of a thing. So the ignorance was, it was a little bit difficult for me to deal with, and it's kind of odd because now that I live in Portland, Portland has a small Jewish community, and it's almost like more the German model, where a lot of people, don't know so much about being Jewish because it's not so dominant. So I'm a little bit, I think, maybe the word handicapped is. I'm a little bit handicapped from my New York experience, because that's what I grew up with. People just knew it. It wasn't, that big of a deal. So going to Germany, the other thing that was shocking to me is how the Jewish community is organized. Are there people in the audience who are either Jewish or familiar with how synagogues are organized in the United States? This is very few. Okay. So in the United States, if you want to join a synagogue, you do something, I do something called shul shopping. You basically, if you're in a community where there's more than one synagogue, you would go around and decide, okay, this synagogue suits the way I am, it's something that I can relate to, I could join, and then you pay a membership fee to the synagogue, so you're a member of the synagogue. And that's how it is really all across this country, and it's been that way historically. So if you, for some reason, you get into a fight with the board of directors, or you don't like the way the synagogue is going directionally, either religiously, okay, you quit and then you can join something else. In Germany, they have a long-standing tradition from the 1800s. They have something called an Einheitsgemeinde, which basically means there's one community. So if you want to be a member of the official Jewish community, you join the community. So you don't join a synagogue, you pay into, and it's a percentage of your taxes, you pay into just the broader community. So let's say you would prefer to support this synagogue, but you don't like this one, you don't have a say. All the money sort of gets distributed. So it's a very different concept. And for an American, it's, you can say, okay, they have their tradition, we have our tradition. For me, it was rather annoying because there were certain synagogues where I just, super Orthodox synagogues, they didn't like how they were run, or the community itself, the way it's sort of operated. I can speak mostly from Berlin. The Berlin community is a mess. It is run by people who have questionable ethics, and there's a lot of controversy that's going on within the Berlin community. And so, unlike the New York, the U.S. system, where you can say, okay, I don't want to be a part of this synagogue, I can move somewhere else. If you want to be a card-carrying member of the community, you don't have a choice. Until recently, it's been 1 year now, there's been a progressive organization that has gotten sort of this, the status where they are allowed to form a separate community, but it's relatively new. And so there are many more people in Germany who are not members of the official community than who are. And a lot of it has to do, some of it has to do is that they don't want to pay. It's like not being a member of a synagogue. They don't want to pay the membership. A lot of it has to do with they don't like the way it's organized. And then the larger part is many people in Europe, as compared to the United States, are secular. Whether they're Jewish or they're Protestant or they're Catholic, they don't go to church, they don't go to synagogue. It's a much more secular thing. You find people in the United States who are way more religious. Even if you look at our political debates, people talk about God or they talk about religion. That almost never happens anywhere in Western Europe. It's just not a topic. And so if you look at the breakdown in Germany, I think you have something like 28, it's roughly equal Catholic and Protestant. I think 28% are Catholic. Most of those are in the southern part, tends to be much more Catholic. 27% are Protestant. Again, Berlin is mainly Protestant, the northern areas. And again, these are people who are official members of the Catholic. Their communities are run the same as the Jewish community. You pay a tax and you're a member of the community. And there's about an equal amount who are not members at all. Now, ironically, most people don't go to church in Germany, but many people stay as members of their respective religions because they want to get married in church, they want their kids to be baptized in church, they want to be buried in there. And I know a lot of Jews who can't stand what's going on politically inside the Jewish community, but they stay as a member because they want to be buried in the synagogue, they want their kids to have a bar mitzvah, so it's kind of this I need it sort of kind of thing for family reasons. Within Berlin, it's probably, and it's the community I know best, the two other larger ones are Frankfurt and Munich, and both of those communities have more liberal synagogues. But what you have to remember about Germany is, obviously, communities completely decimated due to the Holocaust. German Jews were either killed or they moved away. After the war, the communities, and again, the one I know the best is Berlin, was founded by people who either came back or who were in what they called a displaced persons camp. Now, most Jews who were in a displaced persons camp, they really didn't want to stay in Germany. They wanted to go to America or Israel or just get out. But some people got stuck. I met many people who were founders of the original Jewish community. They had a relative who was sick, so they could get a visa, but their relative couldn't get a visa, so they didn't want to go. Other people, it wasn't so easy to get into these countries. Like refugees today have very difficult times. So they waited. In the meantime, they started a business, they had kids, and it was just, again, process of inertia. They started their lives there, so they ended up there. What happened is after the war, you had what I call shtetl Judaism, which is basically the Jewish communities in Germany were launched off of what was Eastern Europe. So there were many Polish refugees who came in. These were super Orthodox people, very unlike what German Jews before the war were very liberal. And that's why many German Jews waited a very long time before they left. And there's an interesting poster. He's a very pretty well-known guy in Germany, W. Michael Blumenthal. He was the Treasury Secretary under President Carter. And he was the first president, or the first director of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which if any of you get to Berlin, it's a fabulous museum. It is absolutely so worth going. They do wonderful programs there, and the permanent exhibit is really very interesting. His family was from Oranienburg, which is a suburb to the north of Berlin. And they waited, because most German Jews, they felt they were German first. You know, their parents had fought in World War I. I know a family where the great-grandfather had kind of an award cross or something that he got from fighting in World War I. They're like, this is not going to happen to us. Hitler is, you know, it's a sidebar, it's never going to happen. They were German, they weren't Jewish first, they were absolutely German. And so when it really became clear after Kristallnacht, what was talked about before, it was very hard to find a place to go. So I think Michael Blumenthal, I think he might have gotten out, it might say on the poster, I think he got out in 40, which was super late. And the only place that you could go, really, was Shanghai. Because Shanghai at that point it didn't really have a government. It was kind of a mishmash place. And there were many, many German Jews, also Austrian Jews, who ended up there. And if anybody goes to Shanghai today, it's very fascinating. They have preserved the section where the Jews lived. And there's a fabulous museum that tells about Jews in Shanghai during that time. And of course, when the war was over, people left, and a lot of the Shanghai Jews ended up in San Francisco, which is what happened to him, and then he went on for a super illustrious career. So the Jews who were left or in these DP camps or populated Germany after the war were basically very super Orthodox. And through the 50s and the 60s, that was the German Jewish community. Men and women were separated. Women had no rights whatsoever. A woman rabbi no one even thought of that kind of thing. People were kosher. They observed all the holidays, and things started easing up. You know, there was some of these Soviet Jews started coming out in the 70s and the 80s, and then also in the United States, Judaism changed as well. Things got more liberal. I mean, we were way ahead in terms of liberal Judaism and having women rabbis in the U.S. than in Germany. But you have to understand, the German Jewish community today is really a relatively new Jewish community. It was basically destroyed, in World War II. So as things started moving along, there was a lot of talk, especially among women and women's movements. Why don't women have more to say? But there was still kind of a stronghold of these older traditions in the 70s and the 80s. A lot of that broke up in the 90s, where you had this massive influx of former Soviet Jews, and the community had to really try to establish and take in all these people who essentially either had no Jewish tradition because they grew up in a so-called communist country where it was very religion, no matter what you were, Russian Orthodox or whatever, was kind of poo-pooed. Or they had, it wasn't this necessarily shtetl Judaism that was the German Jewish community. And then, little by little, through the 90s, there was a lot of change in the 90s where I was involved in, actually I know another woman who's on the, Lisa Klappek, she was that point in Berlin. We had a Jewish women's group there, and we would, meet and discuss various things. So things were sort of moving along. And then, after 2000, some of the first women rabbis came along. And what's happened over the last couple of years, there's been an enormous influx of Israelis, of all people. Berlin these days has, I think it counts something like 19,000 Israelis, around 13,000 Americans there, but 19,000 Israelis. And a lot of them are very young people. They come for the culture. They come for sometimes there's a sort of a software hub. Many of them get their German citizenship because their grandfathers or great-grandfathers had some kind of connection to Germany, and so they're allowed to either get German citizenship or have a residency permit, and that has changed the community enormously. It has opened up movements within synagogues. The one synagogue that I go to, there's a number of different synagogues in Berlin. the ones in the West are pretty well established, but some of them have changed as well. So the main synagogue in West Berlin is Joachimsthaler. It's what I call the Shtetl Judaism synagogue. Many of the original people who started up the Jewish community after the war, their families and their descendants are part of that synagogue. There's another one called Pestalozzi-Strasse, which for an American, for me, it's like the church of synagogues. They have a choir and an organ in the synagogue, and it's apparently a tradition that they've had in the synagogue even from before the war. It's something as an American Jew, I've never seen a choir or an organ in the synagogue. Sorry, but it just doesn't click with me. And but the people who are go there, that's their thing, and that's okay. That's that works. The synagogue that I go most to is a place called Frankelufer. Ufa in German is bank, and it's actually in more of a neighborhood that's populated a lot by Turks and other Arabs in Kreuzberg. And it is not a liberal synagogue in the sense that women don't go up to to read Torah. The women and men are separated, but not with a kind of wall or anything. To just sit on opposite sides, like the women would sit here and the men would sit there. But they have a lot of Israelis at the synagogue, and they're very socially active. They've done a lot of things now with Syrian refugees. They do a lot of volunteer work. There's a meeting on Saturdays after the regular service to talk about different things. So it's kind of more progressive synagogue. My personal, in terms of buildings, the nicest synagogue in the city, I think, but it's also one of the saddest, is the old synagogue from East Berlin. It's on the Riekestrasse. East Berlin in the Soviet days had a very small Jewish community. It was about maybe 200 people. If you think it was tough being Jewish in the West, it was much harder being Jewish in the East, because again, they had this sort of quasi-communist government, so religion was really put down, and it was not easy, and many Jews ended up in the western part, but there were still very small 200 families, and they used this synagogue. Now, the problem with the Riekestrasse synagogue is it's enormous. The synagogues that survived Kristallnacht in 1938 were the ones that were close to apartment buildings. So the Nazis were like, okay, we're not going to burn this one down because maybe the apartment building where non-Jewish people live, that would burn down too. So all throughout Germany, any of these older synagogues are generally there because of that reason, and that's why the Riekestrasse really survived. It is gorgeous. It's very, the architecture is fabulous. The problem with Riekestrasse, it has a capacity for 2,000 people. And sorry, but it never gets it. Even on high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it doesn't get that. And the original community were very sort of older East Berliners. Now people have discovered it. It's a really interesting building. People go there. And there's also Ronald Lauder, who is a Jewish philanthropist, has given money and started a foundation there, and there's some Jewish education that takes place there. But it's kind of sad in a way when you go into this building and you kind of think of what it might have been like before the war. This just beautiful building with so much capacity and so much seating that's possible. And then, there's just not that many people there. So, but it's definitely worth, if anyone gets to Berlin, it's definitely worth going to see the Riekestrasse. So people ask me all the time about anti-Semitism in Germany. And as I said, part of it I think is ignorance. And someone who asked me, do you go to Jewish church? That's not an anti-Semitic comment. That's just completely ignorant. But again, I understand it because, once again, most Germans have never met a Jew. There is anti-Semitism, obviously, and there's two fronts that are concerning to me. One is the uprise of the radical right parties that we see. I don't know how many of you follow German politics. We just had a state election in Berlin, which was shocking to me because Berlin for years was a socialist city. It's very cosmopolitan, it's very liberal, it has very, very strong social and labor laws, but this fringe right party, the AfD, did very well in the city, and astoundingly, it did well in a lot of the eastern parts. So that it's also done well in many parts of Eastern Germany. And the reason for this is we're seeing this phenomenon a lot in our current election, where many people who are down and out are sort of seizing on this Trump ideology. A lot of what he says is kind of similar to what you get in the radical right party in Germany. The other problem, and I really don't know what the solution is, because it might involve, actually would involve kind of dealing with the Middle East issue, is the Jewish-Arab problem. So Berlin is a city of, at the moment, I think there's like 3.6 million people. Before the war, there were 4.2 million. But it's so many people are moving there. And in a lot of respects, it's very funny because I live in Portland now. All these people are moving into Portland. All these people are moving into Berlin. The same issues are the same: affordable housing. There's no housing in Portland. There's no housing in Berlin. The key difference between Portland and Berlin is Berlin has an enormous number of Syrian refugees, as does, which was, I'm sorry I'm not here for that talk, but that talk from next week will be really quite interesting. I mean, Germany has accepted over 1 million Syrian refugees. I think the equivalent, I did the math at one point, would be the equivalent of the United States getting 6 million, which of course is impossible. We're not going to take 6 million Syrian refugees into our country. It's not happening. So the question is, where do you put these people? How do they integrate? You know, many of them, especially, you know, the kids are suffering from a lot of trauma from all these things that they have seen. And then the issue, I have to say, as a Jewish person, you know, Syria was a country absolutely not friendly to Israel. You know, people grew up with very anti-Israel, very anti-Jewish perspective. How is that going to play out? And I think there is today a concern amongst people. It's a fear. You know, it depends on who you ask. I mean, it's hard to generalize. I have a friend. He's quite Orthodox. He goes to the Chabad. Chabad is I didn't talk about Chabad. I know you have Chabad here in Flagstaff. Is not part of the unified community. They have their, like, as they are in almost everywhere else, they have their own little thing. But they are quite strong in Berlin. In fact, they have two main places, one in the west, one in the east. However, my friend is quite frightened, I think, about the Syrians coming in and how that's going to be dealt with. And I can't tell you what the answer is. I think Germany is grappling now. And it's quite admirable that they've, you know, accepted all these people and are trying to help. I don't know how it's all going to work out. I mean, there's not housing for the people before the Syrian refugees came in. Housing is super tight in Berlin. They're being housed in a lot of container type, you know, areas. But you can't keep people in a container all their lives. They have to. People are learning German, and you know they're you know trying to move on with their lives. But I'm not sure how that's gonna. I really don't know how that's gonna work out, and whether it's going to fuel, you know, an anti-Semitic wave. If we're gonna see other kinds of attacks. There is, you know, a danger from some of these radical, you know, right parties, but the most violent issues that have taken place, at least in Berlin and I think in some other cities in Germany, have come from either Arab Germans or Arab immigrants. And the one that hit the news, I think, the most, there is a person that was profiled here who was attacked, but the one that sticks in mind the most, maybe because I was in Berlin when it happened, was in August of 2012 when a Rabbi Daniel Alter, I think at the time he was 53, and he was in a very well-to-do neighborhood in West Berlin, a section of Schöneberg called Friedenau, which is, I'm not that familiar with neighborhoods here, but it's really quite well-to-do. It's not rich, but it's upper middle class. And he was there with his 7-year-old daughter, and he was in front of his house, and he was asked by 4 Arab youth, I don't know if they had German citizenship or not, whether he was Jewish, and he said yes. And they beat him up and they broke his cheekbone. And they threatened the little girl, and it was horrible. He's still in Germany, but that was something that I think totally shocked people. There were a lot of supportive demonstrations afterwards, but it was shocking that could happen. I mean, it really was. I think that, you know, the fact that, and it was a huge embarrassment for the government. It was something that, you know, the German government, whatever you want to say about their policies, they are very cognizant of their history. They almost go over the other end, you know, they're a strong supporter of Israel. You know, we can talk about Middle East politics at one point, but they very much help out the Jewish community. They are super, have their back up about anything like this. So it was a very, very difficult thing for them. In fact, there's another poster of someone I used to work with, Rafi Seligman, who started Jewish Voices from Germany. It's a newspaper that unfortunately is no longer continued, but when he launched the paper, the foreign minister came to like the big opening thing. It was like a huge thing for the government. It was like, yeah, we have, you know, positive things, you know, about being Jewish in Germany. We have this, you know, newspaper about Jewish life in Germany in English. And so they're very, very cognizant about that. You know, one thing I have to say, you know, you compare the Axis powers from the war, if you compare the Germans to the Japanese, not that there aren't any problems in Germany, I mean, the Japanese are still trying to deal with whether they had, comfort women in Korea. They're not open about, what happened, the reparations. I'm not a historian of Asian history, but they've done basically nothing compared to what the Germans did. And the Germans are very good. Whatever you say about being Jewish in Germany or some of these things that have happened, they are well aware of their history, and they do try to do what they can. They support monetarily the Jewish community. I mean, given the small size of the Jewish community throughout Germany, none of these institutions could go on their own just from the support that they get from the tax dollars that they get from the memberships. It just wouldn't happen. So they have a lot of monetary support from the government. So there's, and when this happened to the rabbi in 2012, there was tons of politicians who came out horrified by it. There was a statement from Merkel, and at the time Klaus Wowereit was the mayor of Berlin, and he came out and wore a kippah. There was a huge discussion after this because the rabbi had does everyone know what a kippah is, yarmulke? It's a skull cap. Religious Jews wear that all the time, and it's pretty much a sign that you're Jewish. The rabbi was wearing one, but he had a baseball cap over it. And so there was a huge discussion after this happened. Was, can you be on the street with a yarmulke, with a skull cap, in Germany anymore? Whether you could do that. And frankly, I think you can do that in some neighborhoods. I don't think you can do that in other neighborhoods. It's sad to say this, but there are some predominantly Palestinian or Arab neighborhoods in Berlin, Neukölln, certain sections of Kreuzberg. You're asking for it, basically. I mean, you could wear a yarmulke with a baseball cap or something over, but I would absolutely not do that. It's sad to say that today that is the case. But if you want it in France, I certainly wouldn't absolutely not go with it. I mean, it's just the situation is multiple times worse over there. I mean, it doesn't help the situation, if you're living in Germany, but it's just how it is, and a lot of that has to do with the whole Middle East situation, which I don't think Germany's going to resolve. I'm not sure if that situation is ever going to be resolved, but it's just sort of how things are. So being Jewish in Germany these days, I guess I come back to my New York perspective a little bit. It is definitely different, but in a day-to-day perspective, it doesn't come up that much. I mean, if you're working, you're taking the subway, it's not, it comes up most of the time, I think, if you follow religious practices, if you have, dietary concerns, if you're wearing a yarmulke, and if you're taking certain days off for certain holidays, because obviously Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they don't have, it's not, a holiday, but that's true, like I said, of most of the United States. Otherwise, I think the government goes out of its way to try to help people. There are definitely various places to worship. I'm reminded of the joke, there's part of being Jewish is arguing and always asking questions. There's an old Jewish joke about a rescue crew that comes up to a faraway island. They find a Jewish man there who's been stranded on the island. They rescue him, and they find that he's built 2 synagogues. And they're like, why do you need 2 synagogues? And he said, well, the first one is one where I go to pray. And the second one is where, oh my God, I never go to that one. And so that's kind of how it is. There's always some kind of conflict. The situation in Berlin has gotten a little bit, I don't want to bore you with the inner workings of the politics of the community, but there essentially, and you find this all across Germany, there's a Russian faction, a mainly Russian faction, and then there's sort of the non-Russian faction. And the issue in the Berlin community is over the years, there's been a lot of accusations that the Russian faction, who is led by this man named Gideon Yoffe, who's the current leader of the Jewish community, has committed election fraud. And there was an election last year where the opposing faction looked like they were going to win, and all of a sudden, like the night before the final vote count, there was this box of ballots that was found that turned the election in the Joffe's favor. So it's been contested, it's been, you know, all this kind of thing. The Senat, the local city government in Berlin, has withheld funds for various reasons from the community. A lot of it has to do with irregularities in financial planning. There are issues about the pensions of Jewish community workers, that they've paid too much in retirement to people versus what a city worker would earn. There's a lot of inner politics going on. It's quite embarrassing being Jewish in Berlin at the moment because, you know, this comes out in the papers and it's, you know, it's like, really? Can't we, you know, get our stuff together and like not have these kinds of conflicts? But it's turned a lot of people off of being a member of the organized community because, you know, there's suspicions of corruption and, you know, why should I, you know, be a member of a community when this kind of stuff is going on? And it's a little disconcerting, you know, when, you know, I guess the dirty laundry is aired, you know, but I mean, on the other hand, you know, people need to know kind of what's going on. A lot of the discussion about some of the shenanigans that are going on has flown out into the general discussion, and this has been going on in Germany for the last couple of years because the Mideast is always a big topic. Do Germans have the right to criticize Israel and Israeli politics? And that, I personally think they do, but there's been a huge discussion over the years in Germany about that because, okay, you know, you tried to destroy the Jews, now the Jews have their state, but, you know, can you say anything? Because basically the Jewish state kind of came out of what happened, you know, because they didn't have a state, didn't have any place to go to. So that has been, there's little sort of sensitivity issues that we don't necessarily have in the United States that come up in everyday political life. And so that has been something that the community has had to deal with, and it's something that comes up every now and then. It usually flares up when there's something going on in the Middle East. But I think coming back to the Arab situation, I don't have an answer for it, but I do think it's a real problem. As I said, it's worse in France than it is in Germany. And I'll give you a personal example. When there were these very strong bombings of Gaza after Gaza attacked Israel, Israel really went in and bombed the crap out of them, basically. There were a lot of anti-Israel demonstrations amongst the Palestinians in Berlin at that time. And I was in a discount store. They have these, I don't know if you have Aldi. Do you have Aldi in Arizona? There's a couple of discount stores that are in the United States. But anyway, I was in a store, supermarket basically, and they had this enormous anti-Israel demonstration done by a lot of Palestinian youth, and they were screaming Israel or child murderers. That's the translation. And this guy walked into the store I was in and started screaming. And to her credit, the checkout gal was like, I'll never forget this. She said, "People are in here to buy groceries, not to be political." And I sort of felt like I wanted to say something to him, but I didn't. And I felt badly that I didn't, but I really was afraid. You know, here was a couple of, you know, I don't know how old they were, 19, 20, there was like a couple of them. There was just me. He was, you know, very aggressive. And I didn't say anything. And you know, was that the right thing to do? Was it the wrong thing to do? I really was personally afraid. There were police out on the street, but who knows how long it would have taken for, you know, a cop to come in or handle that or what. So I don't think years ago that would have been the case. But again, it's not so much a German Jewish thing, it's a Mideast thing that gets spilled over into Europe because of the situation in the Middle East. And I, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of, there's a Jewish Arab, Jewish Palestinian, Jewish Arab dialogue, there's Jewish Christians, a lot of these sort of interfaith sorts of things, but, you know, it's still something that that occurs on a, you know, not on a daily basis, but it definitely could happen. So, you know, the fact that you cannot safely, I really do believe this, you cannot safely walk with a kippah in certain neighborhoods in certain places in Germany. That's just how it is. So, you know, everyone's so silent. Nobody is, you know.
I was wondering if you think that technology is kind of, what impact do you believe that that's had on issues of race, like in the more recent years, like communication technology and transportation, everything?
Well, I mean, it's just like anything else. You can get a lot of the demos, the demonstrations, whether on either side, you get more people now because you put out a Facebook thing or you put out this. I mean, that like mobilizes people. Blah, blah, blah. So that's, they get some, one of the worst things to do in Berlin is drive a car because the streets are almost always, especially on the weekends, always closed down for some kind of demonstration of something. So it gets, much more of the mobilization. But I don't know in terms of transportation. I'm not.
Well, sorry. I mean, like, do you think it's how technology in general has had a positive impact on like race issues, or like a negative impact? Like, has it made things better, or worse, or like neither?
Overall, just.
Yeah. It is.
I think technology, personally, I guess no one's ever asked me that question, but I think it probably has more of a positive impact. Because, for example, years ago, when I think of that poor man who was killed in Michigan and his girlfriend, I had that Facebook Live thing, we wouldn't have had that. People take out cell phones, they see what, they wouldn't have had, that sort of thing. So I think overall, it has had a positive impact. And also in terms of mobilizing people for demonstrations. So, are most people here studying German? So I asked one gal here, she gave me a really good answer. She's studying environmental science, and Germans are huge in environment. I mean, you see solar panels everywhere in a country where the weather really is crappy. So that was a good reason. But why would someone in Arizona study German? I'm just curious.
Heritage?
Mine's for speech-language pathology, so I need like a second language. But I also have a lot of like German, like history in my family.
Okay. Heritage?
I'm studying it in relation to sociological theory.
Okay.
Linguistics. And
Wow. I mean, I think it's great. I love German. I think I speak a couple foreign languages. German's a great language.
So I study ancient Greek philosophy, and it turns out that a lot of the secondary sources on ancient Greek texts are written in German.
That's funny because when you go to, they still have this, it astounds me. So gymnasium is sort of the upper level school that you have in Germany, and in many gymnasium you can still take ancient Greek and Latin. It is still offered. So, I mean, it's less than it was maybe years ago, but that's definitely still something you can learn. Anybody else? You want to live in Germany? Why do you want to live in Germany? Oh, okay. That's cool. Interesting. Okay. I mean, you think people from outside of Arizona look at Arizona, we're so close to the Mexican border, you think that, Spanish would be, absolutely up there. So.
I mean, I already speak Spanish, so I thought, why not learn another language?
Oh, okay. Cool.
French.
Well, see, if you speak, now see, there I would disagree. I learned French as my first language, and then I learned Spanish. And as a Spanish, especially the grammar, German grammar is horrific. It's just horrible.
I tried learning Spanish, that didn't work out, so I'm trying a different language.
Oh, okay.
It's easy.
Although many people, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, I'm
No,
sorry.
go ahead.
I study piano performance, classical music, so
Oh, that's
lots
interesting.
of the prolific composers are German, or German descent, or
Well, here's a tip for you. I've actually met a fair number of American artists. Germany supports its arts much more than the United States. I mean, by leaps and bounds. And so, I mean, if you get to a certain level, you probably make a much better living over in Germany than you ever would here.
Do a loft.
So, have most people, I'm just curious, I mean, Jews, especially in this area, probably not that, do most people know Jewish people, or? Okay. Okay. Not like in Germany, so. Okay, that's pretty cool.
I have a question. So, you started by saying most Germans don't know Jews.
Correct.
And
I've never met a Jew.
It's my experience too. So at some point you have a conversation encounter and they realize you're Jewish.
Mhm.
So give us a taste for what you think is the most annoying kind of conversation that happens afterwards, or the one that you find most welcoming that happens between a German person suddenly realizing, oh, I'm talking to Miriam and she's Jewish.
The most annoying by far, that's easy to answer, is talking about Israeli politics. I'm not Israeli. Is it? I mean, they equate somehow. They equate being Jewish with being Israeli. I'm not Israeli. I've been to Israel twice. I have no family in Israel. you know, I have certain personal views about the Israeli situation, but I'm not Israeli, you know, and I just don't, and I think it's very difficult for people who don't live in the Middle East to understand that whole dynamic. That is really annoying to me, the equation of being Jewish and being Israeli, or that you're somehow, Israel is your country. I'm American. I mean, Jewish is like the second thing. That is super annoying to me. The nicest thing is when people are genuinely curious, I would say. When they generally want to ask, you know, about, you know, what the religion is. And you'll find, I gotta say, I'm not a Torah scholar. I mean, I had a bat mitzvah, and I've done, you know, went through a certain amount of Hebrew school, and I've done some after classes, but most Jews are woefully inadequate in explaining things about the Jewish religion. Because, I mean, a lot of people I know are not super religious, and or they had an education, it was many years ago. So it's embarrassing sometimes when people ask you questions you can't answer them. One of the most interesting experiences I had was, and I hope I don't offend anybody, I'm not a huge Chabad fan. I think Chabad serves a purpose, but I have a lot of issues with them. But I have been to some Chabad events in Berlin, and one time I took a German friend, and the other thing you have to know, a lot of my friends are from East Berlin, because my ex-husband grew up there.
For those who don't know, can you say what Chabad stands for?
Oh, okay. Chabad, I'm not sure I can explain Chabad adequately. For me, Chabadniks are the born-again Christians of Judaism. It's basically what they are to me. But it's a very religious group, but they're also very, their idea is to get Jews to all come together. They're very accepting, you know, kind of at first, but they want you, their idea, I think, is they want you to get you back in the fold, or get you back to more practicing. And they are everywhere. If you think there's 2 Jews in one place, there's probably a Chabad person there. I've been to China a couple times. There's Chabad in Beijing, in Shanghai. The rabbi, when I was in Shanghai briefly, his brother was the rabbi in Fairbanks. I mean, they're like these missionaries. You know, I know you have one here. We have them in Portland. Berlin actually has 2. And there's a lot of tension. I think almost every place I've been to that has a regular Jewish community and a Chabad Jewish community, there's a tension between the 2 of them. And a lot of it has to do with sort of Chabadniks trying to get people into their fold, and then the other people who want to be a little more liberal, different type of Judaism, kind of fighting them against that sort of thing. So I did take an East Berlin friend to a Chabad event, and I think she was just like speechless. It was just so foreign to her, because it was also a little bit foreign to me. It was very, you know, traditional. We went to a Shabbat dinner and everything. But it was very interesting for her to see it, because I think there's, I've been to church a couple of different times, and the main difference, the Jewish services go a lot longer, and especially the ones on Saturday, there's usually some kind of a reception or some kind afterwards, and there's like a more of a community kind of thing. Whereas Catholic church services was pretty quick, and then people go home. So it was that sort of different. She liked it, I think, but it was just a different experience to her.
So I'm wondering, as an American who is Jewish, going to Germany and staying for 9 years, and perhaps not anticipating staying for so long, what were the emotions that you went through as far as feeling connected? When did you feel most connected to either culture in Germany at large, Jewish culture in Germany, and what kind of enabled you to feel more connected or disconnected?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I felt more connected to the Jewish community when I started meeting more Jewish people there. I was in Frankfurt for 4 years at first, and then I was in Berlin for 4 years. My German when I first went there was horrible, and so I had a hard time. I was not focused on Jewish, I was just focused on getting through the day. And if anyone's been to a country where you don't know the language and you have a base but you're trying to improve, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And so I was, the first 6 months, I would say, until I kind of, picked things up, it was very tough. But I felt more at home when I got to meet German Jews. I worked in a financial news community, so I had another colleague who was Jewish. She was British, though, and that's also different. And so I think there's actually, it's interesting, the 2 people I had become best friends with, they did Aliyah and now live in Israel. So the last time I was in Israel, I met them there again, so it was kind of interesting. And then when I went to Berlin, I think I found much more home in Berlin just because it's a larger Jewish community and you can find your niche a little bit more. You know, when you're in like a smaller place and there's only a couple of things and stuff, it's tougher. And then I started to feel more home with the language, and then I understood the quirks of what it is to be German, whether you're Jewish or not. I mean, there's things I really love about Germany, and there's things that Germany absolutely bad. You know, it's a very formal society. You know, it's like it's in business, for example, and I'm used to it, and I know how it goes, but I was always Frau Widman. Nobody speaks to you with your first name. You know, it's never that. It's super formal. The writing is really formal. It's and I don't want to generalize, because Americans can be arrogant too, but there is a layer of arrogance in society, and it's very hard for me to describe. It's almost like, I remember going into a store in Frankfurt, and I was shopping for a handbag, and the woman was showing me all these different handbags, and when she came to the ones that were made in Germany, like her demeanor went, oh, these are the ones that are made in Germany. Okay, also 5 times the price, but it was just the way, it was just like, it was almost like you, and again, you know, the young people are much more open to everything, but there was like, you didn't grow up here, you don't have our education, you can't be one of us because you don't have that. And you know, and it's not by, I don't want to generalize, but there's that part of the society that drives me crazy. So I don't know if any of you have any spent much time there, but you know, and then I gotta say, you know, your generation, I mean, people have traveled a lot, they're much more open, they speak a lot of different languages, you know, it's definitely changing in that way. But I guess sort of, folks always say you're sort of now middle-aged or older, there's that, what I call the arrogance level, that'd be crazy. Anyway.
Hi, I'm just curious, I think you mentioned that the Jewish community is doing some work with Syrian refugees.
They're not the community. The synagogue that I go to, in the synagogue that when I go back to Berlin, I'll go back to the synagogue. They have a group where they sign up. There's a lot of opportunities for volunteering because there's so many refugees now. So there's like my daughter is there now and she's volunteering at a clothes bank. So she goes and she sorts clothes and people come in and they say they need this or they need that. So there's this synagogue posted on their Facebook page, again, the technology. We're organizing people from our synagogue to go to Wilmersdorf. There's a big, it's a section of Berlin, a big refugee center there. So it was Jewish people going from the synagogue to help out. It's not organized by the community, it's individual efforts from this particular synagogue.
So besides there is no any organization that wants to reach the Arab people, visit the Jewish community?
There, you know, with the refugees now,
No, just the general.
there is a Jewish-Muslim dialogue group that's been going on for years. There's definitely that. And I'm not aware of something that's specifically refugee-oriented, but you know, there's a lot of Turks in Berlin. You know, and almost all of them are Muslim, Sunni Muslim. So there's definitely that's going on. There's some interfaith stuff that's going on. They also have like a Tag, der offene Kirche or offene Gemeinde, where people can go into a mosque, people can go into a synagogue, or people, you know, most people have been into a church, but they have sort of these minority, you know, religions where they open the doors, so there's that opportunity. But people have to take the initiative to actually do that, you know. But you know, I gotta say, the synagogues in Germany, because of the history, I mean, they're not as walled up as the ones in France these days, but it's intimidating for someone who's not Jewish to go into a synagogue. There's a policeman in front of the synagogue. There's a cop car in front of the synagogue. There's a airport-style security check that you have to go through for obvious reasons. And they're asking, what are you doing here? You know, it's not that inviting, but a lot of it has to do, you know, with the history and the situation, and you know. And then when I think of my non-Jewish friends, they feel like it's not their place. I mean, I've taken some to, you know, to synagogue, but it's also a lot of my friends, mostly from the East. They don't know anything about Protestant, I mean, because they grew up communist. You know, they don't know anything about evangelical, you know, Protestant or Catholic. So it's kind of they have really nothing to compare it to. But it's very interesting for them. But they feel funny because One, because it's Jewish, but two, because it's religion. Because they didn't grow up with religion. So that concept of.
And did you meet people that wanted to convert to Judaism?
Here, this is, I missed that part. There is a section, there's a section of the German population, I don't know if it's decreasing or increasing, who has this sort of what I call the guilt complex. They go to Israel, they work on, they're not Jewish, they're, non-Jewish Germans, who go to Israel, they work on kibbutzim, they love Israel, and I once took a Yiddish class. There's a Jewish Volkshochschule, which is like adult education, because my grandparents spoke Yiddish, and I think now that I know German, Yiddish is probably relatively easy. I was the only Jewish person in the class. I couldn't believe it. It was always like, why would you know Yiddish as a non-Jewish German? And it was this thing about, we massacred this culture, which is ridiculous because German Jews didn't speak Yiddish. Yiddish is the East European language. The German Jews were snobby about it. They were like, oh my God, that's, lower class Jews, they spoke Yiddish, But the class was full of these non-Jewish Germans, and there's some who also get into, into the converting thing. The rabbi, she's a woman rabbi, at the Oranienburger Strasse Synagogue, which is in the east. It's if you see pictures of Berlin, it's the one with the gold dome. It's an enormous building. She's a convert. And I have to say, Giza is her name. She went through rabbinical school, she knows her stuff. Every time I go there, there's something, I don't mean to be disrespectful, there's something so goyish about her. There's something so priestly about her. It's just, I can't stomach the services. I don't know what it is. And she means well, and she's done a great job, and she has, her synagogue is full, but it just, I don't know. And it's totally a non-Jewish response, because in Judaism, someone who converts, you're supposed to accept them as if they were born Jewish. It's completely non-Jewish response, but it's just something about it. So yes, that is a very strange aspect. It's a super minority amount of people, but those people are super irritating. It's almost like
The ones that want to convert?
yeah, but it's almost like the opposite end of the other. If you're converting for, I'm sure there are people who are converting for good reasons, but I've met a few who are these, I would call them German apologists almost. That they feel so badly about what happened that they want to be the victim almost. It's very strange.
You might know the age.
It's not young people. It's mostly middle-aged people. Or if there are young people, I haven't heard from.
You say 40s?
Yeah.
So I have a question. You mentioned a large Israeli expat community.
Yes, in Berlin.
And I'm wondering, and just some of this is my own observation of young Israelis here in the U.S., is my feeling is a lot of Israelis who are not comfortable with the current government are choosing to.
Yes.
But I'm also thinking that many people are drawn to other places for work opportunities, business opportunities. How are you finding that community? Are they drawn to Germany, or are they repelled from Israel?
It's mixed. A lot of them have the benefit of having German citizenship, getting German citizenship, so it's an easy place for them to go. Berlin's a fabulous city. There's a lot going on, and if you're into the arts, as I was telling the pianist, you get a lot more government support there than you would. I don't know what it's like in Israel, but certainly you would here. It's astounding what they dole out in art subsidies. It's a musician's dream. There is that section who can't stand what's going on in Israel at the moment. What the split is, I couldn't tell you. And there's a portion of them that are involved in synagogue, but most Israelis are secular. They have. I was in Israel. When was it? 2015 on Yom Kippur, and I was in the hostel, and they had bread, and I said, "You got to be kidding me! This is Israel." He said, "Well, exactly. We're Israel. We don't care." I was shocked. But apparently, it's not. It's not the only place where Jews eat bread on Yom Kippur. I was like, really? Not Yom Kippur. Sorry, on Pesach. It was Pesach. I was, and for them it was like we don't have to show anything. We're Israeli. We grew up with this. So anyway, no, but the split I couldn't tell you. I think Berlin is a big attraction for the two main reasons. Not so much for the politics, because if you're against Israeli politics, there's tons of places you can go. just get out, you know, why Berlin? There's the residency stuff, and there's the art support. So.
I think we can entertain one more question officially, and then if you have other questions, I'm sure Miriam would
Yeah,
welcome to talk to you personally and in a smaller group afterwards.
Wow, you guys have been great. It's very interesting talking with you, finding out about why folks are learning German. It's always encouraging.
Well, thank you so much.